1 2 1 2. Turn that music up a little. Shout out to Haley. Mark Thompson, you a fool for this one. Let me change my words, you a king for this one. We gon' treat every day like the beginning of the morning. It's time to get woke. It's time to open up your mind. It's time to open up your heart.
This is
Make It Plain.
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make It Plain.
Get woke.
With the 110th NAACP convention here in Detroit, and I thought we'd do well to take some time to talk with an NAACP stalwart and legend. Now, she doesn't like me saying that. She's very, very humble, but she has been a long-standing worker in this organization, and at the moment probably has the most chronological, the living person with the most chronological history with the organization from a worker point of view, from a staffer point of view. NAACP Board Chair Leon Russell praised her during his speech at the 110th Annual Convention.
Now, I also must lift up the lady who provided my introduction this evening. Listen, for 65 years, this lady has served this nation as a soldier in the NAACP Army. She has served continuously since 1954 as a member of the staff. She's held every position throughout the organization. She's worked in the field as part of Branch and Field. She's been responsible for national convention planning, and she has spent many years in our development department, where she currently serves as our senior development consultant. She has done everything there is to do in this association, and I am just proud to call her a friend and a mentor. Would you please give a warm vote of thanks to our official walking, talking, fussing historical archives, Mildred Bond Roxborough.
And we want to hear a little bit about her and her family and her history. Mildred Bond Roxborough is here with us. God bless you. How are you?
Thank you.
So, you are from Brownsville, Tennessee, correct?
I was born in Brownsville, Tennessee, yes, and I spent childhood there up to about 12.
To about 12.
Yes.
When did you first know about the NAACP?
Oh, when I was about 3 or 4 years old.
Is that right?
Of course.
So how did you find out? What was the encounter at 3 or 4 that let you know about them?
My mother's lap. I was on my mother's lap. My parents, I should say to you, were teachers, and I had 2 sisters who were 6 and 7 years older than I. So they would have sessions in the afternoon, or evening, I should say, actually, telling my 2 sisters about civil rights and things, current events and history and the present, things they should know. Mm-hmm. And one of the things on which they focused, of course, was Black history. Wow. And as a part of those discussions, I would hear about the same thing that they heard, and I was a little precocious for my age, so I understood in terms of what she was speaking about, was that this was an organization designed to help correct mistreatment.
Mm-hmm. So you were 3 or 4.
Yes.
You told me yesterday you are, if you don't mind me saying, may I say your age? May I tell my audience your age?
Yes.
You're 93, correct?
Yes, I am.
So for 90 years of your life, you have known about the NAACP.
Yes, I have.
And the NAACP is 110.
Yes.
Wow. So, mistreatment. Did you know at that young age what was meant by mistreatment? Did you know what mistreatment was?
I knew when I did something wrong, I knew that there was a standard of right and wrong. And what I understood was that people were not treated to their advantage. They were mistreated. They were treated badly. Let me put it that way. And of course, shortly in the process, ensuing months and years, I learned more specifically that there were, besides the churches, there were organizations which addressed the issue of helping people who had been mistreated and who had actually been hurt or jailed, or began to understand those very shortly after that period.
Mm-hmm. Were your parents activists?
My parents were, yes, they were. They were attempting, I should say to you, we lived in a county, Haywood County, in West Tennessee, which was one of the three areas geographically in the state of Tennessee in which blacks were not permitted to vote after Reconstruction. And they were concerned about getting the right to vote again in Haywood County. And of course, they undertook to start organizing a branch of the NAACP.
Now, did I read also at some point your parents founded a town or something?
No, my mother was born in a town which her father founded.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
And that was in Arkansas. Yes.
Did you get to know your grandparents at all? Did you know them?
I knew my father's mother very well. She lived until she was 83. My mother's parents I never knew because they had died before I was born. And of course, she met my father in college in Jackson, Tennessee at Lane College. And she's from Arkansas, so I was not around her family. But they had died, her parents had died before I was born.
Both your parents went to Lane College?
Yes, they did.
So what years were they in college? Do you know?
That was before World War I, and the war started. My father had to leave college to go, and he was drafted to serve in the war. But my parents met in college and married before he went away to serve in the war.
Where did he serve? Do you know what country he was in mostly?
No, he did not go abroad. The war ended less than a year after he had been drafted, and he did his service time in the United States.
In the United States.
Yes.
It's just really amazing to hear. We talk about college opportunities and what they're lacking today for our people, but then to hear of your parents in the early 1900s going to HBCUs and graduating and getting an education. That's amazing.
Well, it was an accomplishment that they believed they should undertake individually before they met each other, and they agreed wholeheartedly afterwards. My mother, when he went away, she had gotten a teaching certificate after 2 years in college, and she taught while he was away. When he returned, she actually continued to go to school in Lane, extension school they called it then, and she graduated with honors after her first 2 children were born.
Wow. Your parents were activists somewhat. Were they members of the NAACP?
I don't think they were members at the time they were attempting to recruit people to register to vote. I think they were aware of the NAACP, but I'm not sure that they were both members. They did join during this period. How soon, I can't tell you, whether it was before they got the branch charter or it couldn't have been afterwards because they would have been members by then. And the branch was chartered in 1939.
Okay. And this was the branch in the county, correct?
Well, it was called the Haywood County branch, NAACP. Brownsville was the county seat.
Brownsville was the county seat, okay. You are a highly educated woman yourself, aren't you?
Well, I don't know. When I was 9 years old, I started selling the Crisis. I don't know whether that qualifies as to your question.
Well, well, and that's important. You started selling the Crisis at 9.
Yes, I asked my mother, if I can tell you, if I could sell the Crisis, and if I could write Roy Wilkins, who was the editor of the Crisis, and arrange to sell the Crisis. She said, well, if you think you can do that, by all means. And she provided the paper and the pen. And I proceeded to write to him and ask him, who was the editor, he was the editor of the Crisis, to ask him if I could sell the Crisis. And he came back, he wrote back and said that, of course you can, and your share of the money will be 5 cents.
You were in communication with Roy Wilkins even before he became executive secretary of the NAACP. You knew him before then?
Yeah, well, yes. Well, see, at that time, he was the editor of the Crisis. And, of course, that's the official organ of the NAACP.
Of course. And I guess I want to get my timing right. Would Walter White have been the head of the organization then when you were selling the Crisis?
No, not at that time, but he became so while I was still selling it.
And so who was the head of the organization when you was first selling the Crisis?
Weldon Johnson.
Isn't that James Weldon Johnson? Wow, that is amazing. Did you ever meet James Weldon Johnson?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that, if you would.
Well, I was quite young, of course, but he had come to Kansas City. Our parents moved perforce, I should say, to Kansas as a result of some of the activities related to the NAACP.
So explain what you mean by that. By force.
I'm sorry.
Explain what you mean by force. They were literally ordered or forced or chased out of town. What happened?
Well, my mother was out of town because a brother had become critically injured in an accident. This was around the time of Christmas, and my father was there, and I was staying with relatives because he didn't want me to stay in the house alone in his absence because he worked every day. And this happened in terms of the final, as they said, final straw. The intimidation, the threats, and whatever. And my father had been jailed several times and had been beaten by the police prior to this. Leading up, there was an escalation of things which occurred. And as a result of that, and my mother happened to be out of town at Christmas time, and my father was still there. However, he was told by his grandmother. And, of course, to give you that backstory on his grandmother, his grandmother, his mother, and my grandmother, I should say, was the daughter of a former slaveholder who had other children. And one of his children, a sibling, a half-brother of hers, became coroner of the county of Haywood and the county seat of Brownsville, and he was a doctor as a result. Now, he was white, of course, and he had been given to understand that they planned to kill my father. The sheriff and some other officers of the town were planning to do this as an example of what would happen if you continued the fight to try to vote. And he drove to the country where she lived and told her this. And that he said, you should get Ollie out of the town immediately because this is serious. They do plan to kill him. And I know because I have heard the discussion firsthand. And so my father left that night, Christmas Eve night. And I didn't know he had gone either. And our house burned completely to the ground. And I'm sorry, I forget why the real essence of the question. I don't know.
Well, we were talking about your parents, and we were talking about your education as well. But just since we're on this, because now I'm distracted in this story too. That's not distracted, but I'm caught up in it. Wow. So your dad left town.
None of us knew.
Okay.
Except
And that was probably for his safety.
I think, oh yes. My grandmother promised. She told him he had to get out of town because she didn't want to see him killed, and that the county coroner had told her, and he would not lie to me. She said, because they were half brother and sister, of course, and he took care of her health needs. They were friends, and I mean, it was one of these open, you know how those things happened in the South in those days. Well, he left, and none of us knew it. But the house, it was a 2-story frame house. It burned to the ground. And the people who did it, thought he had been in the house at home when it was burned. And we didn't know until a day later when he called from Kansas City. He went where my mother was, what had happened.
How old were you at that time?
At that time, I was about 7 or 8.
And you had 2 sisters, right?
Yes, they were in college.
They were away, okay. Did the people who burned the house know that there was a child, that child, living in the house?
As is the case in a town like that, they knew not only that there were children, they knew we were a family of 5, they knew what our names were, and they knew how old we are, and they probably knew that I was staying with another relative who was the undertaker, the black undertaker in the town.
I see.
And I would, if I had to hazard a guess, I can't prove this, but I don't doubt that they knew that they expected him to be in the home alone because they knew my mother was out of town.
I see. So your father...
And my other sisters were out of the city in college.
Yeah. So your father left. You didn't know either.
No.
So what was your reaction when you found out your father left?
Well, I was afraid. You know, as a matter of fact, they thought that they hoped that he had gotten out of town and gotten as far as Memphis, or a place like that. But they didn't know. It was 2 days before we knew that he was in Kansas City, because first of all, it took about that long to get there from Brownsville on the train, and second, there would be nobody who could attest to where he was, because he had gotten a friend from Jackson to come and drive him to the station, not in Brownsville, but the next station.
I see. Wow, that's an incredible story. So then you would later join your parents in Kansas City?
My mother came back. She was they never threatened to kill her. Mm-hmm. And she said, they aren't going to keep me away from my home. So she came back and arranged for me to stay with these relatives on an ongoing basis. And she went to an adjacent town, Bells, I think it was called, and taught, because we needed the money. And she taught in Bells, which is about 40 miles from the Haywood County.
Wow. So, I asked you about you being educated, and I asked you about you being highly educated, and then we talked about the crisis. Yeah. But you, like your parents, went to college. You got a master's degree.
Yes,
Did you
believed in education? You know.
And you studied in, is it Paris as well? So you were something else yourself.
No, not really. It was a work study program. When I first went to Mexico, and part of the American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker group, had a very well-known study program, work study abroad, but work study so you could get credit in college or graduate school for certain amount of credit for if you worked, and it involved maybe teaching in a community or whatever your discipline was. There was a job as a volunteer you could do, and that was why I was in France and why I was also in Mexico.
All right, all right. What did you major in college?
Social psychology.
Social psychology.
Yes.
So, what were you hoping to do with a social psychology degree?
Well, I never thought about the NAACP, but I thought I would work with the organizations, a nonprofit, which was interested and committed to helping people who were less fortunate and who needed assistance and guidance in developing their lives, and in other words, a social service.
Right, right. So you said you never thought about the NAACP. So how did it come to pass that you would work for the NAACP?
Well, we lived in Kansas City. I was there until I graduated from high school. Then I went to New York to live with a sister who had graduated and had gotten a job with Pepsi Cola in New York. It was an award for a contest. And as a result, I went to New York and lived with her and attended Howard University. It was during World War II, so travel was very difficult, and at holidays not really possible for civilians, as they called us, because they transported the armed services, priority. But I went to Howard University for 2 years. Then I stayed in New York and finished college at NYU.
At NYU. And you got the social psychology degree at NYU?
I got, my major was social psychology at NYU. And then I worked for 18 months. And then I went enrolled to go back to school and found that the American Friends Service Committee was offering this program for students. And I decided to participate in that. And I did, as I said, in Mexico and then in France. But the Mexico came before I went to college, and France came after I had started.
So again, when did the NAACP come into play? How did you go from that to start working?
Well, after I finished college, I went to graduate school and finished graduate school. The sister with whom I lived stopped working for Pepsi Cola and had been recruited to work for the NAACP. And she did for 2 years. That's how I got to know about the offices in New York and the activities, the programs, and that type of thing, and meet people who were NAACP employees because of her work there. And she married and went to Pittsburgh to live. But the man who recruited her came back to me and said that he had a temporary job he'd like me to do for the NAACP. And I said, oh, no, I'm going on to graduate school and get my doctorate. I'd gotten the master's by this time.
Right.
And he said, you can take 6 weeks and do this and then go the first of the year. So anyway, not to take too much time, I agreed to come and work temporarily in 1954.
Wow.
Going back to work on my doctorate in 1955.
Isn't that something?
and whatever postgraduate work I have done, it has been NAACP work.
Been here ever since?
Yes.
So let's see, 1954. This is 2010. Adele, our chief content officer, is here. What's how you doing it? Come on, it's turn to me. In 1950, yeah.
I think so. That's what the chairman said the other night. I had never counted it, really. I mean, in terms of being specific, I had no reason to. But 1954 to 2019 would probably be about 65 years.
65 years. The 93-year-old did that math quicker than you did, Adele, and me. Lord have mercy. So, 65 years, which to most people, I mean, that's a lifetime.
It is.
Let alone working somewhere for 65 years.
My father died at age about 62. So it was his lifetime.
Yeah. Boy, and you've held every position. Administrative assistant,
Nothing to do with accounting. I stayed as far away from the accounting department as I could.
But you just did this math in here. Why'd you do that? You could have done. Obviously, you could have done the accounting too.
Well, I don't know. I just didn't want to be involved in the fiscal affairs because we'd had too many problems in the NAACP with accuracy and various reasons.
So as soon as we finish talking, I'm going to go tell everybody out there that you did this math in here, and they need to now put you in the accounting department once and for all. You need to spend some time
Did she do it?
No, she didn't do as fast as you did. Adele didn't do as fast as you did. So, 1954, Brown versus Board. So all of this is going on. I guess with that happening around the same time, that kind of lets you know the urgency of coming here to work, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, by that time, I had, that was May 17th.
Look at this.
When the decree.
When the decree came.
I'm telling you this only because we're here in Detroit, and I happened to be here in Detroit working with the executive secretary of the branch on the first Freedom Fund dinner that Dr. Anthony chaired. I was here working on the membership campaign. They had an annual membership drive.
I see.
And a part of the membership drive was to get life memberships too. But they decided to have this first dinner at which they would focus on life memberships. Mm-hmm. And I was here at the Detroit office on Verna Street, which is where that office was. Of the branch on Verna Street here in this city for 6 weeks. And the Arthur Johnson, who was the executive secretary of the branch, and I were working on the Freedom Fund membership campaign when the Supreme Court issued the May 17th
in 1954. That's amazing.
It's a coincidence.
Yeah,
and I mentioned it because you were here, and that's right.
No, well, it's a beautiful coincidence and probably even providential. 1955, Emmett Till. You remember that, I'm sure.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So where were you in the organization at that time?
Mm-hmm.
What were you doing in the organization at that time in 1955?
Where was I? You see, when I first started working for NAACP, I was on what they called the field staff, and I traveled the branches across the country, wherever my boss, who then was the director of branches and field administration, wherever he determined a branch needed and deserved the National Office Assistance for a project like this branch did for the dinner, right. Then I would go and help that branch do whatever it was, whether it was for 5 days or 2 days or 2 or 3 weeks, depending on what it was. So I traveled like that throughout the 50s as a field director at large.
Did you, 1955, did you go to Montgomery?
No, I didn't go to Montgomery, but we had another staff person who did.
Okay. Did you know, though, Rosa Parks? Did you get to know her?
I knew her very well. As a matter of fact, my sister lived with her when she went to Montgomery to work when she was working for the NAACP before I, in the 40s.
Wow.
She stayed with Rosa Parks.
Wow.
And I got to meet her, but I met her in later years and got to know her very well.
Yeah.
She's a very, very kind and generous woman.
Yeah. I mentioned Walter White earlier. Obviously, you got to work with him, didn't you?
Yes, he died in 1955. So as a matter of fact, he actually approved my hiring and interviewed me on the basis of a request from the man who recruited me, who was my immediate boss. And he died about a year after I started working for the NAACP. But I knew him very well.
So let me go, before I go forward, let me go back again. Did you ever meet Dr. Du Bois?
Dr.
W.B. Du Bois?
Yes, and wrote him to get a paper. You could get his speeches for occasions when he spoke, and you heard about it, and you wanted to get a copy of that speech. I wrote him to get a speech. I don't remember which one it was. But he said he would be glad to send it to me for $5.
W. Du Bois charged you $5 for his speech.
Well, I wouldn't publicize it, but yeah, I'm sure it was well known. I mean, it was no secret.
So
he minded money.
Is that right? So, but did you get to meet him in person? Did you get to meet him?
I'm saying I met him, but I mean, we were not. It was just the fact that I met him more than once. At the NAACP office, I met him just as a visitor. I was a visitor. This is in later years before he left the country.
Okay.
And he went to Ghana where he died. But he actually, we thought that was the funniest thing, that $5 could get that speech. I got the $5. I mean, I sent the $5. And that speech was really, my husband wanted the speech. And he said, Mildred, won't you get a copy of Dr. Du Bois' speech for me? By that time I was married. And I said, well, yeah, I'll try, but he's very moody, you never know what he'll do. And he was moody. But I got the speech.
That's something. Dr. King, did you get to meet Dr. King?
Yes, I met him several times, and he got our highest award one year. I don't remember the year, but I was working on the dinner at which the award was when I first met him.
The Spingarn.
And the Spingarn, and I'm still working on it, by the way.
You're working on this year's Spingarn?
The script for the Spingarn dinner when you came into the office,
wow.
or rather when you stopped at the door.
And so how long have you been doing it, actually doing scripts for the programs and the speeches and what have you? How long?
Oh, that's just, I do it for the convention each year. I don't know when I started doing, I'd have to look at the record. I can't, probably about, when I was in the branch department, probably about 1965 or somewhere in there, we started doing just for one event eventually, and it grew as these things do.
Was there any leader of the organization that you felt closest to, that mentored you the most, or that was kind of your favorite? I know it's kind of an unfair question, but of all of them, you met Walter White, you met Mr. James Weldon Johnson, Roy Wilkins.
Well, I worked longest with Roy Wilkins, and I worked first as his administrative assistant, then as his executive assistant, then as an assistant director. And I got to know him very closely in the sense of his thoughts, his habits, and he taught me a lot. I learned a lot from him in the sense of he was a very honest and conscientious man, and somewhat withdrawn, but one of these quietly eloquent speakers, and he was truly committed to this organization and to its cause. Mm-hmm. And I would say if someone asked me who I might admire the most, it would be hard, but I would probably say Roy Wilkins at that point. And then I would qualify by saying my later experience, I knew him in my youngest years, and I learned so much from him. It was as if I were in training.
Yeah.
And then subsequently I became knowledgeable about some of the other directors, executive directors as they were called, and more than one of them I have for whom I have tremendous admiration and respect. And then I would drag in Mr. Johnson today. I mentioned him the other night in that speech to say that he is the kind of young leader that I was sorry we had not been able to see a way to recruit 10 years ago, and to save the problem of making choices that were not quite compatible with the leadership of the organization.
You saw a lot happen throughout history, and you've been faithful to NAACP. Did you ever get discouraged or doubtful? Like all of our organizations, you know, the NAACP has been through its ups and downs. Yeah. It's hard being freedom fighters. You know, that's hard work, tough to raise money. Sure. Did you ever get discouraged and say, hey, maybe I've had enough of this, or what?
Well, I would get discouraged at times, but I always felt that the NAACP would survive. And I said to myself, well, what would you do if you left, which would be for which you would be committed? And I have never wanted to do anything, even as an employment, for which I had no commitment. And so I would say, when I married, I mean, I could have stopped work and gone somewhere else, and then I said, and my husband said, well, you don't need to go anywhere else. Why even worry about it? I can't think of another entity that I have seriously considered, although I'd been offered jobs, money and more money, you know, and that kind of thing.
Wow.
But fundamentally, I think it goes back to my roots of having been so early concerned about the mistreatment, as I saw it then, of our people, which I didn't know was our people at that moment, and I learned quickly and naturally. And I don't think I ever seriously considered leaving the NAACP once I became an adult and involved in working for it.
Yeah. Your husband...
Except to retire, maybe.
Did your husband supported you?
Oh, he was very supportive. He was, this is another story now. It won't take but a minute. He was born here in Michigan, and actually not in Detroit, but in Idlewild, the resort it used to be. And he had a sister who was born here. I don't think he has any relatives here any longer because they're all deceased, as far as I know. But what was the question?
He supported you working for them?
He was legal redress chairman for the Michigan State Conference of NAACP branches when I came here to work for the Detroit branch.
In 1954.
Yeah, but I got to know him in Washington, D.C. When he was in Washington working as some kind of an assistant. At that point, he was a Republican, and he worked for a job they created, I think, at the State Department, because there were no blacks around. John Foster Dulles, who was then Secretary of State, and he was a Republican, and representative of the lawyer, practicing lawyer, and so forth. So right. Apparently he filled that bill. But anyway, I met him in Washington.
But did you meet him here in Detroit, though?
Yes, I met him, but I didn't get to know him.
Right.
You know, yes, he was very active as the legal redress chairman, and they won to a couple of important suits for which they got commendations from Thurgood Marshall, and they were all so happy about that, you know.
You mentioned it's hard to say, you know, any favorite in terms of leadership. they all were admirable and
they
were
all
the
fit
respect.
at a given time and place. I think the ones prior to the current situation where we had choices which were not in the best interest of the association, which caused the problems leading up to the current President CEO's election.
Yeah, yeah. But I know all of them felt the same way about you. They all admired and respected you. I mean, you're probably everybody's favorite.
I respected all of them. They just had varying degrees of expertise and various degrees of compatibility in fitting in the position. I'm talking about the executive directors who came and served 1 or 2 years.
Right.
And there were several preceding President Johnson. And that is an open fact, so that they are good people. And as a matter of fact, I met one of them last night here in the hotel.
Oh, was that right? What would you say to young people who are listening to this and watching this about getting involved, joining the NAACP, or at least just getting involved in freedom fighting?
I would tell them to find the nearest youth council and join it and get involved at an early age, because it will be your benefactor in later life. You'll realize it, and growing up, you will experience some of the privileges that the NAACP was responsible for prying out of our democratic government.
You also knew Clarence and Juanita Mitchell?
I'm sorry?
You knew Clarence and Juanita Mitchell too, didn't you?
Oh, very well.
Yeah.
Clarence Mitchell was one of my favorite human beings. He was a thoroughly good person as well as extremely intelligent, and he understood how to achieve results in difficult circumstances. He worked so well with the Congress, with the Senate and the House, that but long before he retired, they were calling him the 101st senator.
That's right.
And and even the ones who did agree with him, he was the kind of person you respected. You may or may not agree with him, but there was no way you could avoid respecting him. And his wife was a delightful woman who was also very highly intelligent and an attorney as well. And she was also involved as a volunteer for the NAACP,
That's right.
as was her mother.
Yeah, you must have known her mother too, didn't
Oh,
you?
Lordy, yes. That's the job to which I was going when I was hired temporarily for 6 weeks to go down and do a fundraising membership campaign for the Baltimore branch.
Wow.
And I can say to you that I had no idea what kind of reputation she had, but she had a reputation. The mother was the president of the branch. Mrs. Jackson was her name, and she had a reputation of being impossible to please.
Wow.
And I had no idea. I wasn't told any of this when I went to Baltimore, but they introduced me at a staff meeting as the person who would be going to Baltimore, here in New York, there in New York before I left. And at the meeting was our general counsel and the assistant counsel. And of course, when they introduced me and said that Mildred is going to Baltimore, there was a laughter among the staff. And finally, the general counsel said, I sure wish her well, and I hope I'll see her again, but I'm not sure I will. And the general counsel was Thurgood Marshall.
Is that right?
Yeah, that was in 1954. You see, he had not left the NAACP to take over the Legal Defense Fund until 2 years later.
Until 2 years later. Of course, we're talking about Miss Lily Mae Jackson.
Yes, Lily Jackson is the lady who had the terrible reputation. The whole world knew it, you know.
But you got along with her.
Oh, I survived her. She liked me so that she wanted to try to get me coupled with her son, who she wanted to have a wife. And I spent a considerable time avoiding this because I can't mention his name, but he was not the kind of husband material I would ever be able to survive. So I spent considerable time hiding when she, in order not to be coerced. She had a way with her, and not that I would have married him necessarily, but not to be thrown together with him and encourage pushing him to take me out on dates and whatever one does to get to the point of asking somebody to marry them that you're forced to.
Wow.
So it was interesting, but Mrs. Jackson had that reputation in the NAACP. It was an open secret. Mm-hmm. I'm not divulging a secret.
No, right.
Yeah, this
right.
is history.
This is history.
And practically everything I've told you would not be harmful, you know, in the sense of saying something which would hurt some reputation or other.
I'm not going to take up too much of your time. You've been so generous with it. Thurgood Marshall, what was he like? What impact did he have on you?
He could be brusque and rowdy, and he was a very highly intelligent, and he had this facade of being just an ordinary fellow, hail fellow, well met, and he was a brilliant thinker. Yeah. And he was enduring, and of course, he had been, shall I say, mentored by a man whose name was Charles Houston.
That's right.
And Charles Houston set up a process in his offices and at Howard University Law School where they would do their trials on law in terms of the developing a case, which he did, to present which would go to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. It came together as a combination of 9 different cases in those communities, but he chose them and he was the mastermind behind the strategy of training the lawyers and getting them equipped to face the Supreme Court. And Thurgood spent a lot of time, and he was a mentor, he was a mentee of Charles Houston, because he was a very young man when he started work for the NAACP.
At a point, just a little bit of history, there were, at different points along the way, there's always tension between the different black organizations. How did that affect you, or how did you navigate that when there was tension between, let's say, the NAACP and the SCLC, or the NAACP and Malcolm X, or the Black Panthers? How did that impact you? Did you talk
about it and complain about it?
So you never thought about leaving NAACP to join the Black Panthers?
Never.
Okay, I'm just asking.
I understood and appreciated their feelings and their need to express themselves in terms of acquisition of civil rights. I understood that. But to me, it was the wrong way and an ineffective way of doing it. I felt it would cause more negativism, which it did, than accomplishments. But I felt they had a right to do it. And I think people in NAACP said, oh, it'll die in time, but nobody wanted to push them out of existence. It was opposition, that we don't agree with you, we don't support you necessarily. But when we had a meeting at the headquarters in Baltimore many years ago of an Afro-American crisis or something we called it, we invited, we meaning the NAACP, Farrakhan, and members of the various what we called the opposition groups. They all came.
Yes, right.
And of course, are you that age that you've been there at that meeting?
I was at that meeting.
You look you're too young to have been so.
Oh, that's why I love you, Ms. Roxborough. No, I was there. I was a very young man then, but I was there.
but while we disagreed with each other, we did not fight each other.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, the bail we put up in Mississippi paid for the Black Power advocates who had been jailed.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of that bail money was for that purpose.
Yeah.
We eventually got it back. Actually, it worked out well.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. Forgive me, I know this. Is Bond your maiden name? Is that
Bond,
okay?
yes.
So were you and Julian Bond related at all?
Oh, not closely. We were about third cousins.
Okay. Third cousins. All right.
That's about, you can count, I guess, still count it third cousins. I knew him very well, by the way, because he served on the board of the NAACP for many years before he became chairman. And I got to know him well when he was young, when we were both young, because he was in the Student Nonviolent Leadership Conference and one of the founders. And then he became president of the Atlanta branch in ACP and served for 11 years.
Yeah. Medgar Evers, your relationship with him?
Oh, I worked, one of the first assignments I had was to go to Mississippi to interview farmers who had been subjected to economic reprisals, and I worked with Medgar, and we had to really travel at night, and we would drive through the Delta to visit the farmers to get information, because the idea was, and it did work, we got information and their needs, and to the extent possible, then that information was taken back to New York and put together, and the NAACP was able to arrange for to get funds which were put in the Tri-State Bank, so that these farmers would have an opportunity to get some money to help tide them over the winter months when they were being denied credit because of their NAACP activities or what they thought the farmers were doing, and not following the advice of the white landlord.
Right.
But did I answer the question?
Well, that's how you met him. Were you working with him on the farmers? That's how you met Medgar Evers?
That's how I met Medgar and his wife Merle. And as a matter of fact, I stayed with them the first time I came here, and that would have been then, came there. And I got to know him very well, and she and I became very good friends over the years. Yeah. And I know the children very well.
Of course. You are such a delight, and it's such an honor to speak with you and to get this history and to share it with everyone.
Well, I hope I'm helpful in the sense of giving you, I hope I try to be accurate, and I trust that I have been. And I don't have anything to add or to make it sound greater than it is, because I'm just an ordinary individual who was committed as a result of the way I was reared to be concerned about the plight of people of color and of our own people. And it was sometimes somewhat confusing when I was young, when I was a child in Brownsville, because I came from a family, my father's family. They were all very fair people with light brown hair. But anyway, I came out of a family environment until we got involved in the actual efforts to get people to register and vote. I thought all people looked like our family looked. All of us looked like my family. But I didn't know, at 3 and 4 years old, I didn't know that, because they were all very fair. That's what I'm saying. Right. And I didn't know until a little later that the people who looked like me, and I was darker than the others, those. But I didn't know that people who looked like me were the mistreated too.
Right, you know right away.
My parents were preaching at home and all of that, but it didn't occur to me that they were telling me about me.
Right.
At that moment.
Right. Well, I thank you. I honestly do.
Well, I didn't talk too much.
No, it was beautiful.
I answered the questions that you really
No,
wanted.
you did. You did. No, you did.
Because this is something I prefer not to do.
Well, you did it wonderfully and beautifully. Thank you, Mrs.
You're
Roxborough.
kind.
Thank you, Mrs. Roxborough. You're wonderful. Mildred Roxborough, ladies and gentlemen, here are very special guests at the NAACP 110th convention, and she's working at 93 in her 65th year working here. And she's working. This is her job. I'm taking time away from her job as a staff member to talk to all of us. So we are so grateful. Okay, folks, tell everyone about the podcast. Make It Plain. Subscribe to the live daily show at makeitplain.com, please. Every day, 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. We do a live daily show as well that you can get on your podcast app. And then we have the regular podcast, too. So please tell everyone. God bless Mildred Bond, Roxborough, and the NAACP. Our slogan this year, when we fight, we win.
Absolutely.
All right. Fired up, ready to go. It has been Made Plain.
It's time to get woke. It's time to get woke. Get woke. It's time to get woke. Get woke.
Let's make it plain. Make it plain. Let's make it plain.
It's time to get woke.
Can we make it plain? Let's make it plain. Make it plain. I wanna make it plain, better make it plain, yeah.
Time to get woke. Let's go.
Make it plain. MIP. Make it plain.
Is your wallet a little lighter than usual after the holiday season? Consider it money well spent, because you deserve to live your best life, and the Chime checking account wants to help you live yours to the fullest. A little extra money goes a long way, which is why the Chime checking account has tons of benefits that millions of members love, like fee-free overdraft up to $200 for eligible members, no monthly fees, and access to over 60,000 easy-to-find and fee-free ATMs. You even get paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit, all while managing your money on the go, including sending and receiving money fee-free with friends that aren't even on Chime. Sign up for Chime today for you and your wallet. Get started at chime.com/goals24. That's chime.com/goals24. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A., members FDIC. Spot me eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Access to direct deposits up to 2 days early depends on the timing of the submission of the payment file from the payer. Out-of-network ATM withdrawal fees may apply.